The sound of waves crashing against the cliffs echoed like a mournful melody, pulling Ava Bennett back into the memories she had spent 10 years trying to bury. She stood before the massive iron gates of the seaside mansion, her hands clutching a leather bag containing her design portfolio. The salty night wind whipped her brown hair into a mess, but it couldn't extinguish the quiet fury burning in her chest. Damien Roth. The name was a wound that had never healed, now resurfacing as it gleamed from the brass plaque at the gate. Roth Estate. At 27, Ava never thought she would set foot here. Her interior design firm, Lux Haven, was drowning in debt, bills piling up, clients walking away. When the contract invitation from Roth Corporation arrived, she had nearly deleted it on the spot. Damien Roth, the infamous billionaire who, 10 years ago with one ruthless deal, had pushed her family over the edge. Her father, once a dreamer of building a business empire, had collapsed under the weight of failure, leaving Ava and her mother in an empty house with Ava's sobs echoing through courtrooms. She still remembered the cold eyes of the suited men and how the name Roth had been whispered like a curse. But Ava was no longer that crying 17-year-old girl. She had built Lux Haven from the ground up, through sleepless nights sketching designs and grueling days clawing for recognition in the competitive design world. Now her company was all she had left, and she couldn't let it fall. The contract with Roth was her last chance to save it. Even though every fiber of her heart screamed no, reason had won. She would take this job, not to submit to Damien Roth, but to make him pay. Subtly, sweetly. She would delay, derail, frustrate him inside his own pristine mansion. A slight smirk tugged at her lips, but her eyes were as cold as the sea beyond the cliffs. The gate creaked open with a metallic groan, and Ava stepped onto the gravel path that led to the estate. Warm yellow light spilled from towering glass windows, illuminating a meticulously trimmed garden. The mansion stood like a modern palace. Sharp lines, white walls stark against black roof tiles, and balconies that sparkled in the moonlight, all facing the endless ocean. But its beauty didn't faze Ava. It only reminded her that while Damien Roth lived in luxury, her family had lost everything. A stern-looking butler in a black suit met her at the door. "Miss Bennett, Mr. Roth is expecting you in the main lounge," he said, his tone mechanical and emotionless. Ava nodded, keeping her expression composed. She adjusted her deep navy dress, her high heels clicking crisply on the marble floor as she walked in. The interior of the villa was staggering. Soaring ceilings, glittering crystal chandeliers, and abstract paintings lined the walls. The subtle scent of sandalwood lingered in the air, but it couldn't steady her racing heartbeat. She paused in front of a pair of large oak doors. Beyond them was Damien Roth, the enemy she had never faced in person, but who had haunted her for a decade. Ava took a deep breath, pushing away the image of her father, his warm smile, his hopeful voice before everything crumbled. "I can do this," she whispered to herself. "I will make him pay." The doors opened and Ava stepped inside. The firelight in the lounge cast a golden glow on the glass wall overlooking the ocean, creating a scene that felt both intimate and desolate. A tall figure stood with his back to her, shoulders broad beneath a white dress shirt with rolled-up sleeves, hands tucked into the pockets of black slacks. He turned around, and for the first time, Ava came face to face with Damien Roth. He was dangerously handsome. Disheveled black hair, piercing blue eyes as deep as the ocean, sharp enough to strip away every secret. The smirk on his lips was not a welcome. It was a challenge. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice deep and velvet smooth, yet laced with a terrifying control. "I've been waiting for you." Ava gripped her bag tighter, forcing calm into her voice. "Mr. Roth," she replied, her tone ice cold. "Thank you for the invitation. I hope this project proves worth both our time." He tilted his head slightly, his gaze drifting over her. Slow, deliberate, like he was evaluating a piece of art. "Oh, I'm certain it will be," he said. And there was something in his voice that made Ava's heart skip a beat. Not out of fear, but something else. Something she didn't want to name. She moved to the long wooden table in the center of the room, setting down her portfolio, trying to focus on the work. But Damien Roth's eyes stayed on her, like a predator watching its prey. Ava knew. The battle had only just begun, and she wouldn't let him win easily. The chandelier light danced across the marble floor of the Roth estate's grand living room, but it did nothing to warm the chill emanating from Damien Roth's gaze. Ava Bennett stood across from him, separated by a long wooden table, feeling as if she'd stepped into an invisible arena. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from his presence. Too real, too overpowering. Damien Roth wasn't just a name from a painful past. He was a storm, one that pulled everything into its orbit through sheer silent force. "Miss Bennett," he repeated, his voice deep and dangerous, drawing out each syllable as if savoring the taste. "Have a seat. We have much to discuss." He gestured toward the leather chair across from him, but his eyes never left hers, sharp as blades, as if flipping through the hidden pages of her mind. Ava tightened her grip on the portfolio bag, doing her best to appear calm. She pulled out the chair and sat down, her deep blue dress shifting with her movement. And she noticed his eyes flicker, just for a second. Quick, but enough to make her feel like she'd been touched. "I'm here for business, Mr. Roth," she said, her tone firm, emphasizing business as a reminder to herself. "Let's talk about the project." He smirked, a smile without warmth. "Straight to the point. I like that." Damien leaned forward, fingers interlaced on the table, a silver ring glinting under the light. "But first I'm curious, why would a designer like you agree to work with me, given our history?" The words were a dagger to Ava's chest. She stiffened, breath caught. He knew who she was. "History," she repeated, her voice like ice, though fury churned beneath. "Do you mean how your deals destroyed my family? Or are you referring to the crying girl in court whose name you never bothered to learn?" Damien's deep blue eyes lit up, not with anger, but something else. Curiosity, amusement almost. "The girl from back then," he said slowly, his voice dipping low, as if pulling the memory from the shadows. "I remember you, Ava. Messy brown hair, red eyes, and the way you looked at me like you wanted to burn the world down. You haven't changed much, have you?" The words made her feel stripped bare. He remembered her. Not just remembered, etched her into his mind like a portrait hanging in the cold gallery of his thoughts. She wanted to scream, to storm out, but her feet felt nailed to the floor. "Don't pretend to care," she said through clenched teeth, her hands clenched under the table to stop their trembling. "I'm here because my company needs this contract. That's all." Damien tilted his head, his gaze slowly trailing over her, like he was rereading a story he already knew by heart. "That's all?" he echoed, a note of subtle doubt in his tone. "I don't think you're that simple, Ava." He stood tall, imposing, and walked to the fireplace, crackling softly behind him. The flames highlighted his sharp features and cast a long shadow on the glass wall facing the ocean. "But we'll have time to get to know each other," he said. "For now, let me show you what I want you to design." He motioned for her to follow, and Ava, reluctant, stood. She didn't want to be near him, didn't want to feel the heat of his body as they passed each other, or the faint trail of his woody cologne stirring something unnamed deep inside her. Damien led her through long corridors adorned with abstract paintings and muted LED lighting, stopping before a steel door cleverly concealed behind intricately carved oak. "My collection room," he said, unlocking it with a keypad. "I want you to turn it into something more special." Inside was a vast room, steel walls partially hidden behind panels of rare wood, shelves displaying bronze sculptures and ancient vases, and a massive abstract painting dominating the center wall. LED lights gave the space a sleek, cold elegance, just like its owner. Ava stepped in, trying to focus on the work. But Damien's eyes followed her, not just appraising her skill, but something deeper. "What do you think?" he asked, standing too close, close enough that she could feel his breath stir her hair. Ava turned to face him, holding her ground. "It's beautiful but soulless," she said bluntly, her tone edged with challenge. "Much like its owner." He laughed, a low, brief sound that still managed to startle her. "You're sharper than I expected," he said, stepping even closer, his eyes locked on hers. "But careful, Ava. Not everyone survives playing with fire." She swallowed hard, her heart thundering, but she didn't back down. "I'm not afraid of fire, Mr. Roth," she said steadily, though a storm raged inside. "And I'll do this job well, not for you, but for me." Damien studied her in silence as if wanting to say something more, but then he simply nodded. "Good, I look forward to it." He turned away, leaving Ava standing in the cold room, her heart tangled in turmoil and a strange new realization. Damien Roth wasn't the ruthless man she remembered, but she would not let herself forget why she was here. Not now. Not ever. The dim LED lights flickered in the Roth Estates collection room, casting eerie shadows over the massive abstract painting on the wall. A storm of red and black that seemed to scream on behalf of Ava Bennett's tangled heart. She stood in the middle of the room, gripping her design portfolio tightly, struggling to concentrate on Damien Roth's words. But his deep, smooth voice, like a river with hidden currents, kept pulling her into a strange state, half alert, half captivated. "This is the most advanced security system available," Damien said, approaching a control panel hidden behind a carved oak panel. He touched the screen, and a stream of glowing data lit up the dim room. 10-inch thick steel walls, biometric lock, and motion sensors for any abnormal activity. No one gets in. And he turned to her, his deep blue eyes sweeping over her with a smirk. "No one gets out unless I allow it." Ava tightened her grip on the portfolio, the eerie feeling growing, as if he wasn't just talking about the room, but about her. "Sounds more like a prison than a gallery," she replied, sarcasm masking the unease rising in her chest. "Afraid someone might steal your precious art? Or is there something else you're hiding from?" Damien laughed, a short, low sound that echoed off the enclosed walls. "Afraid?" He stepped closer. Too close. Close enough that she could smell the woody spice of his cologne. "I'm not afraid of anything, Ava, but I do like control. You should know that by now." She instinctively stepped back, her heart pounding, not from fear but from the way his gaze clung to her, like she was the rarest piece in his collection. "I'm not here to play power games with you," she snapped, turning away, pretending to examine a bronze sculpture on a nearby shelf. But as her fingers brushed the statue, she accidentally triggered a hidden mechanism, a tiny, well-disguised sensor. A high-pitched beep shrilled from the control panel. Ava jerked her hand back in shock. Damien's expression darkened. He strode to the screen, his fingers tapping rapidly. "What did you touch?" he asked sharply, tension tightening his voice. The LED lights turned red, flashing aggressively. "The sensor, it registered a threat," he muttered, eyes narrowing toward the sculpture. "A threat?" Ava stepped closer, her pulse racing. "I barely touched it. How was I supposed to know there was some secret button under there?" Her voice was rising now, a mix of panic and fury. He didn't answer immediately, still focused on the screen. Then came the sound. A heavy click, like a coffin being sealed. The thick steel door, previously hidden behind the oak panels, slid down with a metallic groan and locked with finality. The red lights dimmed, leaving only a few weak emergency bulbs glowing faintly in the room. Ava felt her blood run cold. "No!" she whispered, rushing to the door, pounding her fists against the freezing steel. "Open it! Now!" Damien stood still, hands in his pockets, calm in a way that was almost terrifying. "I can't," he said flatly with a tinge of irritation in his voice. He turned to her, eyes shadowed. "You activated the emergency lockdown. The system thinks this is a breach. Once it's triggered, nothing opens it. Not codes, not biometrics, nothing. Not for 48 hours. 48 hours? Ava whirled around, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her breathing quickened. "Because I touched the stupid statue? You're kidding, right? We're locked in here. For 2 days? No phones, no signal, no anything?" He nodded, eyes still locked on hers. "Exactly." She let out a hollow, almost hysterical laugh. "This is your fault," she shouted, pointing at him. "Who the hell puts a panic trigger under a piece of art? You did this on purpose, didn't you?" Damien raised an eyebrow, unbothered. "On purpose? You really think I wanted to be locked in here with you?" He stepped forward, his voice dropping into a challenging whisper. But I will admit, you do have a way of making things more complicated, Ava. She wanted to scream, to punch the steel wall, but the tight space seemed to shrink around her, pressing in. The once luxurious collection room, polished wood shelves, LED-lit art, sleek bronze sculptures, now felt like a cage. The steel walls behind the decorative paneling gleamed cold and unyielding. The silence between them was broken only by the sound of their breathing. Ava looked around, desperate for options, and spotted a small metal cabinet in the corner. She opened it to find a few water bottles, a box of protein bars, a thin blanket, and a flashlight. Fantastic, she muttered sarcastically. At least we won't starve. Damien walked up behind her, close enough that she could feel his body heat in the chilly air. You should be grateful I plan ahead, he said, a teasing note in his voice. Most people wouldn't survive 48 hours with me. She turned to face him, only inches apart. Don't think I'm going to apologize for triggering your trap, she snapped. But her eyes lingered on his face, sharp features, tight lips, and a look that seemed to carry words he wasn't saying. She backed away, folding her arms across her chest to hide a shiver. Damien didn't respond. He simply pulled out the blanket and laid it on the wooden floor. Sit down, he said, his tone lighter but still edged with command. We need to conserve energy. 48 hours is no joke. Ava hesitated, but her aching legs forced her to lower herself onto the floor, keeping a safe distance from him. Silence settled between them, broken only by the faint sound of waves beyond the steel-reinforced walls. She glanced at him, the man she had once cursed, now sitting across from her, his gaze no longer icy but carrying something unreadable. This wasn't my plan, Damien said suddenly, his voice deep and low, cutting through the quiet. But maybe it'll be interesting. Ava smirked faintly, trying to hold on to her defiance. Interesting? You call being locked in because of a stupid button interesting? But something strange was stirring inside her, something beyond anger, a gut feeling that these next 48 hours would change everything. And the sound of that clicking door, triggered by her own accidental touch, felt like destiny, a destiny that had just locked her in, with him. The air inside the Roth Estates collection room felt like a curse, heavy and stifling. Faint LED lights overhead cast flickering shadows onto the storm-like painting mounted on the wall. Ava Bennett sat on the polished wood floor, just far enough from Damien Roth to feel safe, but not far enough to escape the warmth radiating from his body in the frigid space. The steel walls, hidden behind elegant wood paneling, now encaged them in a luxurious prison, and the muffled echo of waves beyond the sealed door only made the space feel more suffocating. The single thin blanket lying between them felt like a fragile boundary, but it could not hold back the storm rising inside her. Ava hugged her knees to her chest, her gaze sharp and cold as it pierced Damien. He sat casually, leaning against the display shelf, disturbingly composed, as if being trapped in this room for 48 hours was merely an inconvenience, or worse, a game. This is your fault, she snapped, her voice trembling with rage. If not for your ridiculous security system, I wouldn't be stuck here. And if not for you, my family wouldn't have fallen apart. Damien raised a brow, his blue eyes gleaming with something sharper than amusement. He leaned forward, clasping his hands, the silver ring on his finger, catching the light. Your family? He repeated, voice low but laced with challenge. You still believe I destroyed your life, don't you, Ava? You've built this entire narrative with me as the villain. But have you ever questioned whether any of it's true? His words struck like a blade. Ava jumped to her feet, fists clenched, closing the gap between them with just a few angry strides. The truth, she shouted, her voice echoing through the locked room. The truth is, my father killed himself after losing everything. Because of your deal, because of how the Roth Corporation crushed people like him. Do you think I'm too stupid to know who was behind it? Damien rose too, tall, imposing, his nearness suffocating in the tight space. His breath was warm, his eyes ice cold. You want the truth? He said slowly, deliberately, each word like a blade slicing through the air. I wasn't the one who signed the contract with your father. I didn't lie to him. But you don't want to hear that, because blaming me is easier, isn't it? Ava shook her head, hot tears pricking her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. "Don't pretend you're innocent," she choked out. "You're a Roth. Everything passed through your hands. My father talked about you, about how you smiled while signing off on deals that destroyed lives. You ruined my family." Damien was silent for a long moment, his gaze darkening as if struggling with something inside himself. Then he spoke, so softly Ava had to strain to hear. "I met your father, once, before he died." He paused, meeting her eyes. "He came to my office begging for another chance, but the contract had already been signed by one of our partners. There was nothing I could do, and I didn't smile, Ava. I never smiled." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. She stumbled back, bumping into a display shelf. A ceramic vase wobbled slightly. "You met my father?" she whispered, voice breaking. Her mind filled with the image of her father, his warm smile, trembling hands as he signed those final documents. Her chest ached. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Why did you let me believe—" She couldn't finish. Her throat tightened. Damien stepped closer, just one step away now. "Because you didn't want to know," he said, voice low but no longer cold. "You walked into this house with a wall of hatred, and I was never the one who could tear it down. But if you do want the truth, maybe it's time you look back at your memories and asked whether everything happened the way you think it did." Ava turned away, trying to hide the confusion on her face. He was lying. He had to be. But the way his voice dropped, the way he looked at her, it wasn't cruel. She sank back down to the floor, hugging her knees again, trying to regain control of her breathing. "You don't know anything about me," she whispered, but her words no longer carried the certainty they once did. Damien sat down across from her again, just a few feet away. The blanket between them looked more like a meaningless line than a barrier now. "Maybe I don't," he said, his voice softer, almost gentle. "But I know you're not weak. You're not that girl in the courtroom anymore. So why do you keep clinging to the past?" His words struck something deep inside her, something she hadn't let herself feel in years. She looked up, locking eyes with him. There he sat, sleeves rolled, dark hair tousled, and eyes that no longer challenged her, but seemed to be searching for something. The tightness of the room made every movement visible, every breath he took, every small shift in posture. She wanted to push him away, to cling to her fury, but a part of her, small, quiet, was wondering about this man across from her. "You don't get to talk about my past," she said, but the edge in her voice was dulled. She pulled the blanket toward her like a shield, but her eyes drifted to his hand, long fingers, the glint of silver from his ring, and a faint scar across the back. A story she didn't know. Damien noticed her glance and a crooked smile tugged at his lips. "You're curious, aren't you?" he said with a teasing lilt. "About me. About what you don't know." Ava flushed and looked away, her heart pounding. "Don't flatter yourself," she snapped, but her voice trembled. The closeness, the heat of his presence, the woody scent of his cologne. It was all too much. There was still anger, but it was tangled now with something else. Something warmer. Dangerous. Silence settled again, thick and charged, broken only by the sound of their breathing. Ava knew the fight between them wasn't over, but something inside her had shifted. A crack had formed in the wall she had built, and Damien Roth, watching her intently, seemed to know it too. The narrow collection room inside the Roth estate seemed to shrink in the darkness, its steel walls pressing inward. Only the soft amber glow from a flickering emergency bulb remained, shivering like a candle about to go out. Ava Bennett sat curled on the wooden floor, clutching the thin gray blanket like a shield between her and Damien Roth. He sat a meter away, legs stretched out, back resting against a display shelf, his rolled-up white sleeves revealing a faint scar on the back of his hand, a small detail she couldn't stop noticing. The steel behind the wood panels encased them in a fortress without escape, and the sound of distant waves, muffled by the sealed door, was a cruel reminder. There was no way out. The silence between them stretched long, no longer a wall but a fragile thread straining at its limits. Damien's words, that he'd met her father, that he hadn't smiled while the man begged, still echoed in Ava's mind like an unhealed wound. She wanted to reject it, to hold on to the hatred that had sustained her for a decade. But his eyes, no longer cold but filled with a quiet sincerity, left her unsettled. She tightened the blanket around her, trying to block out the chill seeping through her navy dress. But the trembling in her body wasn't just from the cold. It was from the questions creeping in, ones she wasn't ready to face. "You're cold," Damien said, breaking the silence. His deep voice wasn't a question. It was a fact, calmly stated. He leaned forward, eyes scanning her carefully, noticing everything. The way she clutched her knees, the way her lips pressed tight to stop their trembling. Ava looked up, wary, though her voice lacked its usual edge. "I'm fine," she replied, even as her teeth gently clicked against each other. She didn't want him to see her weak, didn't want his sympathy, not from a man she had once cursed, but the cold of the hardwood and the sealed air made her words sound hollow. Damien gave a dry, humorless smile. "Don't be stubborn," he said, reaching for the edge of the blanket. His fingers brushed against hers, just briefly, but it was enough to make her flinch, like she'd been shocked. He pulled the blanket toward himself, but instead of keeping it, he pushed it back into her hands. "Use it," he said simply. "I don't want you passing out in the middle of the night." She snatched it back, wrapping it around her shoulders, her eyes still fixed on him, waiting for the mocking tone. But it never came. Only a quiet, reluctant kindness that left her shaken. "I don't need your concern," she whispered, though she subconsciously pulled the blanket tighter, as if embracing a memory long buried. Silence returned, but this time it felt different. Fragile and uncertain, like both of them were standing before a door neither dared to open. Ava stared down at the fabric, her fingers tracing the seams, and her father's face surfaced in her memory, sitting in his tiny office, his eyes glowing as he spoke of his dreams to build a legacy. "My father believed in dreams," she said suddenly, her voice distant, as if the words had escaped without permission. "He wanted to leave something behind, something I'd be proud of. But then he got betrayed. One deal, one mistake, and it all collapsed. He couldn't go on." The words hung between them, heavy in the sealed room. Ava bowed her head. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she bit down on her lip, refusing to let them fall. She didn't want Damien to see her cry, didn't want him to think she was fragile. But when she looked up, his eyes weren't mocking. They were focused, quiet and deeply attentive. He was silent for a moment, then leaned forward, clasping his hands, his gaze lifting to the storm painting on the wall, as if searching for something lost in time. "My father didn't dream of legacy," Damien said, his voice low and slow, as if each word cost him something. "He only wanted power. I grew up in boardrooms, cold, controlled, trained to be a machine. No emotions, no mistakes. If I disobeyed, he made sure I paid. Through words, silence, or worse." Ava swallowed, her heart pounding. She didn't want to feel sorry for him, didn't want to see him as anything but the villain she'd crafted in her mind. But his voice, rough, scarred with pain, cut through the wall of anger she'd built. "Are you trying to make me feel sorry for you?" she asked, hoarse, but her usual sharpness had dulled. Damien let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Pity," he echoed. "No, Ava, I don't want your pity." His eyes met hers unflinching. "But I want you to know the truth. It wasn't me who tricked your father. It was Marcus Vale, my former partner. He tampered with the contract, took the money, and vanished. I found out only after your father had passed. I cut ties with Marcus immediately." The words hit Ava like a wave. She stared at him, stunned. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Marcus Vale. The name meant nothing to her, but Damien's eyes, steadfast, free of deceit, made it impossible to deny outright. "You knew about this," she murmured, searching his face for lies. But all she saw was exhaustion and honesty. "I did," he said, voice weighted. "But I couldn't fix the past. I tried in my own way. But you didn't want to hear it, Ava. You wanted me to be the villain, because it was easier." She shook her head slowly. The first tear finally broke loose, sliding down her cheek. You're wrong, she whispered, voice trembling. I never wanted you to be the villain. I just wanted my father back. The confession hung in the air, raw and exposed. Damien didn't speak, but something shifted in his eyes. A softness, an ache. He reached out, intending only to adjust the blanket. But his fingers grazed hers again. They both flinched, eyes locking for one suspended second. And Ava felt it. Not just the touch, but the warmth. The rare, unguarded truth behind it. You should get some sleep, Damien said gently, though the command still lingered in his tone. He turned away, leaning against the shelf again, keeping his distance. But Ava knew. That distance no longer felt so clear. She pulled the blanket tighter, lying down on the cold wood floor, her gaze never leaving him. In the darkness, the scar on his hand shimmered beneath the low light, like a story still waiting to be told. And for the first time, Ava wondered, was the man before her truly the enemy she had believed him to be? Or just another soul carrying unseen scars of his own? Are you still following the story? Please leave your thoughts on the story in the comments below. All your comments are the motivation for us to create better stories. Don't forget to subscribe to Soul Stories. Thank you very much. The dim golden light from the emergency bulb inside the Roth Estates collection room flickered like Ava Bennett's breath, casting warped shadows across the storm-painted wall. Day 2 of confinement began not with heaviness, but with a strange, charged silence. It felt as though she and Damien Roth stood on the edge of a cliff, uncertain whether to move forward or retreat. The steel walls behind the ornate wood panels still caged them in, cold and impenetrable. But the tight space was no longer stifling just because of air. It was something else now, something simmering in the air between them. Ava sat up from the hardwood floor, the thin gray blanket slipping from her shoulders, revealing goosebumps rising on her skin from the chill. She glanced toward Damien, leaning back against the display shelf, his eyes half closed, but she knew he wasn't asleep. His fingers were loosely interlaced, the faint scar on the back of his hand glinting under the dim light, a detail she couldn't stop thinking about. After last night, his confession about his father and the truth about Marcus Vale, the wall of hatred inside her had cracked. She didn't want to believe him, didn't want to see him as anything but the villain. But his voice, deep and wounded, and the sincerity in his eyes clung to her, like a melody she couldn't silence. She stood up, trying to shake off the cold and the whirlwind in her mind. The pale light made the room feel gloomier than ever, and she couldn't bear to spend another day swallowed by shadows. I'm going to fix that light, she muttered sharply, needing to break the silence. She walked to the metal cabinet in the corner, where she had found water and protein bars yesterday, hoping to find anything useful. Damien opened his eyes, his gaze following her, a hint of a smirk tugging at his mouth. You know how to fix lights? He asked, teasing but not mocking. Or are you just looking for something to distract you from being locked in here with me? Ava turned back, shooting him a glare. I'd rather fix the damn light than sit here and listen to you gloat, she snapped, but the corner of her mouth betrayed her, a tiny, involuntary curve she didn't manage to suppress. She opened the cabinet and found a small screwdriver and a roll of electrical tape. Not ideal, but enough to try. She crossed the room toward the emergency light mounted on the wall, pulled a wooden chair beneath it, and climbed up, determined to reclaim a sense of control, even if only by lighting the room. Damien stood, walking closer, calm but alert. Careful, he said, his voice low and firm. I'm not in the mood to nurse a concussed designer. I don't need your concern, Ava shot back, reaching up to unscrew the light's casing. But the chair beneath her wobbled, just slightly. Her foot slipped, and a small gasp escaped her lips, right before gravity gave way. But she didn't hit the floor. Strong arms caught her, steadied her, pulling her into a firm chest. Damien, one arm wrapped around her waist, the other steadying her shoulder, holding her close. Time paused. Ava looked up, her eyes locking with his, just inches apart. No anger, no accusations, just something raw, curious, and deeper, like a flame igniting in her chest. Damien's ocean-deep eyes didn't waver, and in that moment she saw it. Longing, unhidden, real. His grip tightened, just slightly, as though he wasn't ready to let go. "You okay?" he asked, his voice husky, barely above a whisper. He didn't release her, and she didn't pull away. The touch lingered too long. Ava felt the heat of his hand through her dress, and her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. I'm fine," she whispered, though the words were unsteady, and her eyes refused to look anywhere but his. The small room seemed to close in tighter. Not from lack of air, but from the swell of feelings she couldn't name. Damien finally let her go, but slowly, as if it took effort. He stepped back, slid a hand into his pocket, and pulled out something small, a silver fountain pen, worn and scratched. He looked at it for a moment, then held it out to her. His eyes softened. "My father's," he said quietly. "The only thing I kept. He used it to sign contracts that destroyed people. But for me, it's a reminder that I'm not him." Ava took the pen, her fingers trembling as they brushed the cold metal. She looked up at him, and for the first time saw not a ruthless billionaire, not the man from her nightmares, but someone just as wounded as she was. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, her voice hoarse, as if afraid of the answer. Damien shrugged slightly, but his gaze didn't break. "Because you need to know who I am, not the villain from your story. I have scars too, Ava. They just aren't always visible." His words struck something deep. Ava inhaled slowly, trying to steady the rush of emotion inside her. She clutched the pen, holding it like a fragile truth she wasn't yet ready to name. The room, once a cage, now felt like a space forcing her to look at him and at herself. She sat back down on the floor, still holding the pen. Damien joined her, just an arm's length away. Their eyes met in silence. Not enemies now, but two people trying to understand one another. And in that moment, Ava realized the fire between them wasn't just heat, it was connection. Something deeper, something quietly, dangerously beginning. The second night inside the Roth Estates collection room was colder than Ava Bennett had imagined. The soft, flickering glow from the emergency bulb cast distorted shadows on the storm painting. A whirlwind of red and black, mirroring the one raging inside her. The steel walls behind the lavish wood panels tightened the space, and the distant ocean waves were a luxury they could no longer touch. Just a memory echoing beyond reach. The thin gray blanket that once served as a boundary now lay between her and Damien Roth, like a fragile thread, pulling them closer even as both tried to resist. Ava curled on the hardwood floor, arms wrapped around her knees, her hands trembling as the chill seeped through her navy dress. The memory of the afternoon, the way Damien had caught her, how their eyes locked, and the old pen he'd given her, still burned under her skin like a fire she didn't dare name. She glanced at him. He was leaning against the display shelf, white shirt wrinkled, dark hair slightly tousled. The faint scar on his hand shimmered under the faint light, and once again, she found herself wondering about the stories he hadn't told. The cold wasn't the only thing making her tremble. Her stomach growled, a reminder that they hadn't eaten since the protein bar they split that morning. She stood up and walked to the metal cabinet in the corner, their tiny supply station. "We need to eat," she muttered, her tone clipped, masking the exhaustion in her voice. She pulled out the last protein bar and a bottle of water, staring at them with disdain. Not exactly a dream dinner, but better than starving. Damien opened his eyes, that ocean blue gaze sweeping across her with a half smile. "You really do know how to make everything sound dramatic," he said, rising and walking over. He took the protein bar from her, broke it cleanly in half, and handed her a piece. Their fingers brushed just briefly, but it sent a jolt through her chest. Ava accepted her half, sat back down, and took a small bite. The bland taste only reminded her of warm meals with her father, meals filled with laughter, and she swallowed quickly, forcing the memory away. Damien sat across from her, just an arm's reach away. He took a swig from the water bottle, then passed it to her. "Drink," he said, voice low. "You need your strength." Their fingers touched again as she took it. She tried to ignore it, tried not to think about how warm his hand had felt. She drank, the cool water soothing her throat but doing nothing to calm the fire building in her chest. She set the bottle between them, their eyes meeting in an unspoken pause. She shivered, not from cold, but from how close they were. Damien noticed. "You're cold," he said, stated, not asked. He shrugged off his black suit jacket and tossed it to her with effortless precision. "Wear it. Don't think it means I'm being nice." The jacket landed in her lap, warm and soft, carrying the scent of his woody cologne. Ava grasped it, her fingers trailing the fabric. She shot him a glare. "I don't need you to play hero," she muttered, but the cold left her no choice. She pulled the jacket over her shoulders, and the warmth from his body sank into her skin, stirring her heartbeat in a way she didn't understand. Damien smirked, the corner of his mouth lifting in something almost teasing. "Hero? You're giving me too much credit, Ava." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on hers. "I just don't want you freezing to death before we get out of here." She let out a dry laugh, but the sound vanished quickly. "You really have to control everything, don't you?" Her voice was tinged with sarcasm, but when her eyes met his again, she couldn't look away. There was something in his gaze, not mockery, not arrogance, but a quiet hunger that stole her breath. "Not everything," Damien said softly, almost in a whisper. "There are things I can't control." He shifted closer, only a single arm's length now. His words lingered like an invitation, and Ava felt his heat even though the room was freezing. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest like a warning bell. "Don't come closer," she said, but her voice faltered, and she didn't move. Their eyes stayed locked, an invisible rope tightening between them, pulled by something stronger than reason. "You afraid of me, Ava?" Damien asked, his voice husky with something dangerous. He leaned in, just inches away now, his breath brushing her cheek, hot, tempting. "Afraid?" she echoed, her eyes flaring with a mix of defiance and fear. "I'm not afraid of you, Roth. I just don't trust you." But the words felt weak, even to her own ears. She wanted to shove him away, to cling to the wall of anger she had built. But the fire inside her was burning too fiercely, and he was the one who had ignited it. "Then prove it," Damien said, voice barely audible. And just like that, as if some invisible string snapped, he reached out, his fingers brushing her chin, lifting her face gently. Ava inhaled sharply but didn't pull back. Their eyes locked, and in that breathless moment, the world, the anger, the past, the grief, faded away. He kissed her. It wasn't soft. It was intense, wild, like a clash of wills. Ava didn't yield. She answered with fire of her own. Her fingers clutched his shirt, pulling him closer, the kiss deepening, turning into something raw and consuming. But then, like lightning, her father's face flashed in her mind, his smile, his voice, his dreams. She gasped and shoved Damien away, breath ragged, eyes wide with panic. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking. "We can't. I can't." She stumbled back, bumping into the shelf, a fragile vase rattling from the impact. Damien stood frozen, his chest rising and falling, eyes burning with confusion and restraint. He ran a hand through his hair, struggling to regain composure. "Ava," he began. "Don't," she said quickly, voice frayed. She hugged her arms to her chest, his jacket still draped over her shoulders, a reminder of everything that had just happened. I don't know who you are, and I can't betray my father." The words sliced the air, not at Damien, but at herself. She turned away, tears brimming, refusing to fall. Was she betraying her father's memory, or simply being pulled toward a man she barely understood, one who made her heart race in ways no one else ever had? Damien said nothing. He only looked at her, eyes no longer smoldering with want, but filled with something deeper, something unreadable. He sat down on the floor again, just a few feet away. The silence between them grew heavier than ever, but Ava knew. That kiss had changed everything, and there was no going back. The silence inside the Roth Estates collection room was heavier than any words Ava Bennett had ever heard. The dim golden glow of the emergency bulb still flickered on the ceiling, casting twisted shadows across the storm painting. But it couldn't pierce the darkness clouding her heart. After that explosive kiss with Damien Roth, the moment that erupted from defiance into desire, she had shoved him away, panicked by memories of her father and the weight of her tangled emotions. Now they sat apart on the cold wooden floor, the thin gray blanket between them no longer a boundary, just an empty symbol. The steel walls surrounding them still stood, but the suffocation wasn't spatial anymore. It was emotional, built from everything left unsaid. Ava held her arms tightly around herself, Damien's black jacket still hanging over her shoulders, the scent of his cologne, smoky, woodsy, haunting her skin. She didn't dare look at him, not when his sea blue eyes carried both confusion and quiet restraint. That kiss had changed everything, but she didn't know what it meant, or whether she could trust the man she had once called an enemy. Her father's voice, warm and full of dreams, echoed in her memory like a warning. Don't let go. Suddenly a sharp beat pierced the air. The LED lights flickered overhead, shifting from red to green, and a heavy metallic click followed. The thick steel door, hidden behind polished oak, slid upward with a mechanical hiss, revealing the brightly lit hallway beyond. The security system had released. Just as Damien said it would, 48 hours to the minute. Ava shot to her feet, her pulse hammering. Not from relief, but from dread. She glanced at Damien. He stood as well, calm to the point of cruelty, like 2 days locked together, and what had happened between them meant nothing at all. We're free, he said, voice low, emotionless. He stepped out the door without looking back. Ava swallowed hard, clutched his jacket against her chest, then dropped it to the floor like a memory she couldn't bear to carry. She followed him, each step heavier than the last. They left the collection room in silence, as if they hadn't fought, hadn't shared food, hadn't kissed. The hallway was lit with chandeliers and polished marble floors, but nothing could erase the shadow clinging to her heart. At the front gates, Damien finally stopped and turned to face her. His eyes no longer burned. Instead, they held something distant, unreadable. Thanks for surviving, he said with a hint of irony, but his eyes didn't smile. I'll be in touch about the project. Ava pressed her lips together, voice colder than the wind outside. Don't bother, I'm pulling out. She turned away, walking through the gates without looking back. But when the salty ocean wind hit her, she felt his gaze behind her, like a thread she couldn't quite sever. 3 days later, Ava sat in the cramped office of Lux Haven, surrounded by design drafts and a stack of unpaid bills. She tried to focus, but her mind kept drifting. To the collection room, to the click of that door, the warmth of Damien's jacket, and the kiss that had shaken her to her core. She'd walked away from the project, but every night since, she'd asked herself, was she running from him? Or from herself? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she said, expecting her assistant. But when the door opened, it was Damien Roth. Tall, imposing, in a charcoal gray suit. His ocean blue eyes locked straight onto her. Ava's heart stuttered, but she masked it with cold defiance, standing behind her desk. What are you doing here? She snapped. Damien closed the door behind him and stepped forward, hands in his pockets. Relaxed, but with an intensity in his gaze that contradicted his calm. I want you to continue the project, he said, his voice firm and deep. You're the best, Ava, and I'm not accepting you quitting. Just because of what happened. She gave a dry laugh, sharp, bitter. What happened? She repeated. You mean the kiss? Or the part where I almost believed you weren't the man who destroyed my family? She glared at him. Don't pretend, Roth. You know exactly why I can't work with you. He tilted his head, eyes locked on hers, reading the battle behind her walls. I'm not pretending, he said softly, genuinely. And I don't want you to work with me just because of a contract. He stepped closer, voice low, even. I want a new start, Ava. No hatred, no past. Just us. His words cut deep, not because they hurt, but because they reached someplace inside her she'd tried to keep locked away. She backed into her desk, gripping its edge to steady herself. Us? She whispered, voice shaking. You think one kiss erases everything? You think I can forget my father? Forget what we lost? Damien moved closer, just one arm's length away now. I'm not asking you to forget, he said, his voice steady, vulnerable. I'm asking for a chance to prove I'm not your enemy. He paused, his eyes sweeping over her. Deliberate, slow, like he was memorizing her. And I know you felt it too, Ava. In that room. You felt something. She drew in a sharp breath. Her heart pounded and she feared he might hear it. His eyes, no longer challenging, but quietly asking, unsettled her more than any accusation ever could. She wanted to scream, to shove him out. But a part of her, the part that kissed him back, that held his old pen in shaking hands, was trembling. I can't, she said finally, voice barely above a whisper. She turned her face away. Please go, Damien. I don't want to see you again. Silence, then a quiet nod. If that's what you want, he said, his voice thick, as if bracing for the end. He turned to leave. But just before he did, he reached into his jacket and set something on her desk. A business card. Not his. A lawyer's. If you change your mind, he said, his voice unreadable, or if you want the truth, call him. He knows things I haven't told you. The door clicked shut behind him, and Ava stood frozen. Her eyes dropped to the card. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper. A knowing, a weight. The truth about her father and about Damien was waiting, and she couldn't run from it forever. She picked up the card, her fingers clenching around it like it might unlock something buried deep. Not for Damien, for herself, but deep down she already knew. The line between them was no longer clear, and Damien Roth's eyes still haunted her, like a promise that hadn't yet been spoken. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the window of the law office, illuminating the business card Ava Bennett gripped like a talisman, guiding her toward the truth she had long feared and craved in equal measure. It had been 5 days since Damien Roth walked into Lux Haven and left that card behind, along with an offer for a new beginning that had shaken her to the core. She had tried to forget the kiss in the collection room, intense, conflicting, and full of longing, but his ocean blue eyes, too honest for a man she once called a villain, haunted her every night. She could no longer run, not from him, not from the question that had consumed her since she was 17. What really happened to my father? The law office was modest, tucked in the heart of the city, lined with well-worn shelves and the scent of aging paper. Harold Grayson, her father's former attorney, stood to greet her, a man now in his 60s with silver hair and a kind, weathered gaze. Miss Ava, he said warmly, though tinged with surprise. It's been a long time. I wasn't sure you'd ever call. Ava sank into the leather chair, her fingers still gripping the card. I need the truth, Mr. Grayson, she said steadily, locking eyes with him. About my father, the bankruptcy, and Damien Roth. Grayson nodded as if he'd been waiting for this day. He pulled a thick file from the shelf and laid it before her. I hoped you'd ask one day, he said softly. Your father, Thomas, was a dreamer, but he trusted the wrong man. Marcus Vail, a partner in Roth Corporation, manipulated the investment contracts, siphoned money, and disappeared. Damien Roth wasn't directly involved, but he found out after your father passed. Ava swallowed, her pulse quickening. These words echoed what Damien had said that night in the collection room. But now they were backed by documents, history, and something heavier than guilt. Fact. So Damien didn't do anything wrong? Her voice cracked. Then why didn't he say anything? Why let us suffer? Grayson's eyes held both sympathy and admiration. Damien did more than you know, he said, sliding several papers toward her. After your father's death, Damien quietly bought back your family's assets. The house, the land. He paid your mother's debts for years through an anonymous trust. I was the executor, at his request. He didn't want you to know. He believed he owed you, even if he hadn't caused the pain. The words hit Ava like a tidal wave. She stared at the documents, signed transfers, receipts, a short letter from Damien instructing silence. Her hands trembled as she flipped through them. Why? She whispered, voice tight with emotion. Why did he do this? Grayson gave her a sad smile. He told me he saw you cry in court the day your family lost everything. He couldn't undo the past, but he wanted to do something. Damien Roth isn't an open man, Ava, but actions speak louder than intentions, and his were always for you. Ava sat frozen, heart torn between anguish and unexpected relief. Damien wasn't her enemy. He had protected what little remained of her family, while she had hated him for 10 years. She rose, thanked Grayson with shaking hands, and left the office. Her steps heavy with truth, but her eyes set on one thing. She had to see Damien. That evening, Ava stood outside a small coastal restaurant, the sea breeze whipping her brown hair around her face. She wore a simple black dress, but her eyes were sharp with resolve. Inside, Damien sat alone in the corner, warm golden light casting sharp lines across his face. He looked up, surprised as she entered. "Ava," he said, voice low, carrying disbelief, "I didn't think you'd come." She walked toward him, her grip on her purse tight to keep her nerves in check. "I spoke to Mr. Grayson," she said firmly, though emotion laced every word. "I know everything. About the assets. About my mother. About what you did." She paused, standing just one step away from him. "Why didn't you tell me? Why let me hate you for so long?" Damien didn't look away. His eyes were steady, but a flicker of quiet pain passed through them. He stepped closer, only inches between them now, and the familiar scent of his cologne stirred something deep in her chest. "Because you would have thought I was trying to buy forgiveness," he said, voice rough. "I didn't want that. I wanted you to see me. Not the past. Not what I tried to fix. Just me." His words cut through her. Not to wound, but to reach what was left of the wall inside her. She took a shaky breath, tears slipping down her cheek, but she didn't turn away. "You saw me cry in court," she whispered, "and still helped us. Even after I called you a monster. Why, Damien?" He reached out, his fingers brushing away the tear from her face. Gentle, grounding. "Because I couldn't watch you suffer anymore," he murmured. "And because I saw you, Ava, not just that broken girl, but the woman standing in front of me now." She looked up at him, and for the first time, she didn't see an enemy. She saw a man with scars like hers, trying, failing, and still choosing to care. The wall crumbled. She stepped forward, pressed a hand against his chest, feeling his heartbeat under her palm. "I was wrong about you," she whispered, her voice breaking, "but I don't know how to start over." He took her hand, held it tight. His eyes burned, not with desire, but with sincerity. "We don't need to erase the past," he said. "Just start somewhere new. Are you willing?" Ava didn't answer with words. She rose on her toes and kissed him. Not like the first time, when it was fire and fury, but soft, gentle, a vow. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like something fragile, something real. And in that moment, bathed in golden light and the sound of waves rolling in from the sea, Ava knew they had found each other, not through anger, not through captivity, but through the truth. The crimson sunset stretched across the sea, spilling through the tall glass windows of the Roth estate, casting golden light across the hallway that led to the collection room. Ava Bennett stood before the steel door, hidden behind the intricately carved oak panels, her heart pounding, not with fear or anger, as it had the first time she stood here, but with something far deeper. It had been 3 months since that tender kiss with Damien Roth in the seaside restaurant, the moment the final wall of resentment within her had crumbled. Today she returned to the mansion, not to confront, but to transform the very room that had once imprisoned them into something new, a place where they had found each other. Damien stood beside her, tall and steady in a rolled-up white shirt, the faint scar on his hand catching the soft hallway light. His ocean-deep eyes met hers, not with challenge, not with burning desire, but with quiet devotion, as if she were the most precious thing he'd ever known. "You ready?" he asked, voice low and warm, a faint smile on his lips. He keyed in the code, and the door slid open, revealing the collection room, not suffocating anymore, but still echoing with the memory of the 48 hours that had changed everything. Ava stepped in. The LED lights glowed brighter now, illuminating the storm painting on the wall. But the storm no longer mirrored her soul. The steel walls behind the rich wood still stood, but she didn't see them as a cage. She carried a rolled blueprint in her hand, its soft curves and warm tones a promise of healing. "I want this to be a storytelling space," she said, eyes sparkling. "Not just a collection room, but a memory hall. For us." Damien stepped in behind her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. The familiar scent of his cologne, smoky, earthy, set her heart racing again. "Our memories," he echoed, voice low, a smile in every word. His hand gently touched her shoulder, fingers trailing a familiar path. She turned, and their eyes met. One brief, loaded moment. "You've done it, Ava. You always do." They spent the day together, rolling out drafts on the hardwood floor, debating over color palettes and lighting, laughing when Damien pretended to misunderstand her vision. Every glance, every accidental touch, brimmed with intimacy. As the sunset faded, they sat on the floor, now covered by a soft rug instead of the thin blanket from months ago. Ava leaned into Damien's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. She knew then, this room wasn't confinement anymore. It was choice. It was home. "I used to think you were my enemy," she whispered, eyes on the storm painting. "But you showed me I was wrong. You showed me love." Damien took her hand, their fingers weaving tightly. He pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest. "And you showed me I didn't have to be my father's son," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "You showed me I could live with my heart." He kissed her, not with urgency but with depth, a vow wrapped in silence. Behind them the steel door slid shut, but this time there was no ominous click, no fear. Just two people bearing their scars, choosing each other. 1 year later, the beach in front of Roth Estate shimmered beneath the setting sun, waves lapping gently like a lullaby. Ava stood on the balcony, her white dress dancing in the breeze, a new design draft in her hand. Lux Haven had flourished, new contracts, glowing reviews, a rebirth she never imagined possible. She smiled, free in a way she thought she'd lost forever. Behind her, Damien wrapped his arms around her waist, his breath warm against her neck. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, the smile in his voice as familiar as the sea. "Everything," she whispered, leaning into his chest. "That room. United States. The fact that I almost walked away from you." She turned to face him, her eyes locking with his. And she saw it. Love. Not just desire, but an eternal promise. Damien dropped to one knee, and Ava's breath caught. In his hand, a simple silver ring, glinting beneath the golden sky. "Ava Bennett," he said, voice rough, steady. "I won't promise you the world, because you've already built one of your own. But I will love you, protect you, and stand with you through every storm. Will you marry me?" Tears rolled down her cheeks, but this time, they were joy. "Yes, Damien," she choked, smiling. "Yes, I'll marry you." He slid the ring onto her finger, rose and kissed her. A kiss full of salt air and everything still to come. They stood there, no longer needing an escape, because what they had found was the only thing worth keeping. And behind them, the collection room, now a story-filled library, stood quietly, a sacred reminder that their love had begun in captivity, but led them into freedom.